Good evening. My name is Mike Harris. I'm Hill School class of '84. I'm a current parent and Hill trustee. In my professional life, I'm a managing director at the PFM Group. I've been involved in many diversity and inclusion initiatives, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about some of them at the Hill and away from the Hill. Before we introduce the panelists, I wanted to uh, make three statements and have three requests of the group. One, I really want to thank you all for joining and your continued interest in Hill and in racial justice. The fact that so many of you were on this call, coupled with the diversity and the numbers that we see and the protests, has made me really hopeful that things this time may change and may change in a real way. Second, I hope this is a safe place where we all can speak our minds and present our truths. I realize that each of us have different lens on the world, but I ask that we have open minds and without judgment. Third, I ask that we explore what the Hill is doing and talk about what more we should be doing at the Hill and away from the Hill in our communities and at our corporations. This issue is a lot bigger than Hill. And in fact, it's a lot bigger than just an African American issue. But given recent events, I think that's going to be today's focus. With that, let me introduce the panel. Okay, so the panel tonight, we have Reverend Christy Adams, Ari Baum, Andrew Curleason, Wallace Gundy, Zach Lehman, Sasha Mayfield, Lisa Rowling, and Rob Whaley. You can all see the titles on the screen, and each one of us will be speaking during our presentation. We've received a bunch of questions. I think many of them will be answered during our presentations. So I ask that people hold their questions till we get into it a little bit. With that, I'd really like to talk for a second. This call isn't about me, but I'd like to share my truth. When I came to the Hill in the fall of 1979, I was just one of a handful of African American students, and Hill was a much different place. It was a much rougher place, and there was what I'd consider some racial stuff going on, but it was kind of just part of being a Hill boy. Personally, I never paid much attention to it. The turning point for me was my fifth form year. Reverend Benzinger asked me to do a chapel talk on MLK Day, and I agreed, but made a snide comment afterwards, and I said I was surprised that people at Hill knew who MLK was. And he let it slide, and we continued our day that day. But a few days later, he came up to me and said that he was really disappointed, angered, and upset about my comment and wanted to talk. And we had a really long, really productive talk about race at the Hill. And we covered everything from curriculum to activities to attitudes, and that was a turning point to me. I think I wasn't the same person after that. I tended to be a little more vocal and a little less shy about sharing my thoughts and my truths. So here's my truth. In addition to being a Hill boy, I'm a Black man. And I'm a large Black man. I'm also the son of a police officer who trained his sons how to interact with the police and how to deal with police interactions. Unfortunately, those trainings have come in too handy. I can't count the number of times I've been stopped for driving, jogging, or shopping while Black. So while I enjoy privilege that a Hill education has provided me, all too often, I worry about my family, friends, and colleagues of color who all have stories about when they were stopped. Thankfully, none have resulted in tragic endings that we've watched on body cams or cell phone recordings lately. But this is really emotionally taxing. It's tough to talk about. I wonder about the cost. I studied economics. What's the cost of wasted time? What's the cost of ruined lives? So that's my truth. I would love to make changes in our society. I'm really proud of the changes Hill has made to date, but there's more to be done. But with that, I'll turn it over to Zach Lehman to talk a little bit about what's going on at the Hill.
Thank you, Mike. And I want to offer my thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. It's a terrific turnout, and I've enjoyed the conversations that I've had leading up to this with many of you. And I want to thank all of you for reaching out directly to me and to other members of our community. And I'm looking forward to sharing stories tonight, sharing information, and hearing ideas from all of you. I wanted to first start by just sharing how things are at Hill today over the last few years with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. When I looked at the list of people who signed up for tonight, it was clear to me that we had alumni going back over 50 years that are signed up for tonight's forum. So without doubt, there have been a lot of changes at Hill, even for those of you who were at Hill just a few years ago. So I wanted to at least provide a framework and a foundation so that everyone understands at least what some of the data is right now, what some of our current programs and initiatives are. So first of all, today we have 39% of our students are students of color. That has grown dramatically over the last 2 decades. In 2000, we had 15% students of color, and even in 2011-12, we had 32% students of color. So that number has grown. It has stabilized right at that number the last couple of years, and it will be that next year as well, 39% at the current time, although our enrollment can change a little bit between now and the fall. Our faculty has also seen a significant increase in the number of people of color on the faculty. We have a faculty of about 107 this year, and 18% of our faculty are faculty of color, as self-identified in an annual survey that we do. That is this year's number as well as next year's number. That number was dramatically lower. We didn't have stats going back 20 years, but in 2011-12, that number was 3%. So it's more than 5x times the amount just a decade ago. Our senior leadership team, which is comprised of 15 senior administrators at the school, is also an area of growth. It still has a long way to go, but it was 10 years ago, it was 0% people of color on the senior leadership team, and today it's 12.5%, including our new incoming associate headmaster, who is our first person of color in that role, as well as the first woman in that role, Sylvia Rodriguez Vargas, who I believe is on the call today. She's actually moving to Hill as we speak, so I think she's on her cell phone listening in. So welcome to Sylvia. Our board of trustees is an area certainly that we have been working hard at in terms of diversity. I would say we haven't worked hard enough in terms of our people of color on the board. Our big push in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years is to increase the gender equity on the board. Traditionally, Hill, because it was an all-male institution until the late 90s, the board was predominantly male. And so we've done a good job, I think, of increasing the female membership of the board, but increasing the overall diversity of the board is an ongoing objective for the school. Financial aid, I raised this topic. A number of alumni contacted me over the last few weeks and asked me how much financial aid that we provide to students of color. And so I just want to share some statistics here so that you understand the context. Last year, we had 201 students who received financial aid at the school. Of those 201, 56 or 28% of them were students of color. In addition, we distributed $2.6 million in financial aid, or 35% of our total financial aid budget were awarded to students of color. And that number is effectively the same last year, this current year, which we're just finishing, and going into next year. One interesting thing that was really illuminating to me, a number of our alumni contacted me and asked me how many of our students of color are taking advantage of our counseling program, and some information about resiliency of our students of color. We have made a significant change in our counseling program at Hill this past year. We introduced clinical counseling on campus for the first time. We have, I think it's 4.5 full-time counselors, and that number is increasing next year. And Lisa Rothling, who's our director of counseling, is one of the panelists, so I invite you to ask her some questions. But I asked her for a little bit of data. This past year, which was, again, the first year we had clinical counseling, 35% of the students who accessed counseling services were students of color. As most of you know, over the last trimester of school, like every school in the country, Hill shifted to online learning, what we called Virtual Hill. And at the end of Virtual Hill, we did a resiliency study of our students and faculty, asking them a range of questions about mental health, about stress and anxiety. And this was all in the context of Virtual Hill, which obviously is very different than a live, in-person, community-based Virtual Hill. So some of this information could change when we're back on campus, but we imagine that the challenges related to COVID-19 will continue to perhaps exacerbate some of these issues. And we did see that students of color struggled disproportionately in terms of their connectivity, relationships, and even support with their classmates and faculty during Virtual Hill. We have not studied whether that's the case when we, in regular session. I should mention too that all of this data in a comprehensive way is shared with our Board of Trustees 3 times a year. We have a dashboard, sort of like a scorecard that keeps track of a lot of data, but these data points are also shared and over time, not just a one-year snapshot. So our Board of Trustees is regularly looking at our growth and improvement in these areas. In addition, the numbers don't tell the full story. I also just wanted to share some of our programs and initiatives and positions at the school. These were also in response to many of the questions that were directed to the school over the last few weeks. And again, these are things that have been reported both to the board and during our State of the Hill events, which we held over the last couple of years for alumni and parents and other friends of the school. First of all, I believe it's been for 5 years, we've had either a director or co-director of diversity and inclusion. This has not been a full-time role. It's been a portion of a faculty member's duties. And Christy Adams, Reverend Adams, who's on the call tonight, is our current interim director of diversity. She was the co-director of diversity this past year. And so we do have that position. We have currently have a student inclusion council. I think this kind of council or association has been in place at Hill for a number of years. I don't know exactly when it started. It has had different names over time. And 2 things notable that the Inclusion Council are responsible for or involved with are the sort of operation of Inclusion Week, which happens at the Hill each year, and has become more and more robust in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years. And also, we annually send students and faculty to the People of Color Conference. This is a conference put on by the National Association of Independent Schools. It rotates to different cities across the country, and it's a remarkable conference, and basically a life-changing conference for our students and faculty who attend. And they bring their experience back to the community and share that. This past year, we had students come and speak at faculty meeting about their experience and what they learned and what they were hopeful for in terms of the lessons that could be applied at the Hill. We have a wide range of curricular initiatives. I've received a number of emails and questions about, what does the Hill teach today? I was speaking with an alumnus earlier today who told me that actually back in the 70s, there was a semester-long course on, in the 60s, there was a semester-long course on the history of minorities was the name of the course. We don't have a sort of a standalone course in this area, but I think it's safe to say that we incorporate issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion in just about every course area or subject area, especially in our English classes, in our religious studies and philosophy classes, and of course in our history and social sciences as well. I actually have it in front of me. I could sort of share with you every initiative or every curriculum component related to this, but I think I hope you can understand that it's pervasive in our curriculum, and we certainly have incorporated a wide range of underrepresented authors and underrepresented topics and periods of history that have been ignored in the past, perhaps. I also got a great email after one of our earlier forums last week from Nancy Bodie, who's our head librarian, who shared with me that, and I didn't know this, that she has made a concerted effort over the last period of time to increase the number of underrepresented authors in our library collection. So that was great news to hear as well. As has always been the case, there are extensive clubs at the Hill School of varying degrees and varying activity, but there are a number of clubs and student groups around diversity, equity, and inclusion, including SOCA, our Students of Color Association, GUTS, which is an organization for young women, Black Student Life, Hispanic Student Alliance, International Students Group, HASOGI, which is our LGBTQ Alliance, the South Asian Student Association, a Women of Color Association, and our Muslim student group as well. One of the reasons that the previous slide, we've been so successful increasing our number of students of color at the school is through a number of admissions partnerships with organizations that focus their efforts on preparing young students of color to attend schools like the Hill and other schools in the country. And we have a long-standing relationship with Prep for Prep, and especially the Prep 9 program. We were one of the original partners of Prep 9, and we continue to be. New Jersey Seeds, which is an organization that obviously is in New Jersey and serves students of color in New Jersey primarily, has actually held their summer program, their summer prep program on our campus, I think for at least the last 8 or 9 years. Unfortunately, they couldn't come to campus this summer. We had to cancel all of our summer programs due to COVID-19, but that's a long-standing relationship. And many of those students, Hill is their first boarding school visit, and they apply to Hill and have been fantastic members of our community. The Russ White Foundation also is an organization in New Jersey that is similar to New Jersey Seeds. It was founded by Russ White, who's actually an alumnus of the school and of Hill, and a former faculty member child. We've seen a lot of students from that foundation come to Hill. And then perhaps our longest standing relationship is with A Better Chance, which is a national organization that serves students of color, helping them attend a variety of different kinds of schools across the country. One of our alums, Theo Killian, and I'm forgetting his class right now. Theo, who was our commencement speaker about 4 or 5 years ago, is the chairman of the board of A Better Chance and has been helpful in helping us continue that relationship. 3 years ago, we incorporated hate speech and identity-based misconduct into our code of conduct. And we've had, I would say, approximately 25 to 40 incidents that we've responded to in varying degrees. And Ari, Mr. Baum is on the call here. Ari, could you just add a little bit of context to this, if you would, as our Dean of Students?
Sure, thank you. The cases that we review will range. So some cases will be a student using hate speech just in a general context. Maybe they're singing along with lyrics to a song, or they're speaking more casually with friends. And then on the other side of the spectrum, a student may use hate speech or offensive language directed toward another person based on how they identify. All forms of hate speech are not acceptable at this school, but the way the school responds will range. So in the former case, where it's students speaking more casually, more ignorantly, that will be more of an educational response, more of a restorative response, even though there will still be some discipline involved with that. Whereas in the latter case, where a student directs words toward another based on how they identify, that's considered what's called a level 3 offense, where you would go before a discipline committee for your position to be reviewed at this school. As Zach said, that I don't know exactly how long we've been responding that way. It's my 4th year as Dean of Students and 8th year at Hill. Certainly in the 4 years I've been Dean of Students, we try to respond in the ways that I just described. One important thing that I think Zach will probably get into, that I'm certainly hearing a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I've heard just before that as well, there are cases that come up that we don't hear about. And it's not as simple as people need to speak up. The school needs to do more as far as making sure that people feel comfortable speaking up. And I think that that's been some of the really important feedback that I've heard and received directly in the last couple of weeks. And we'll probably share some of the ideas that we have going to that effect soon. So thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Ari. The school has certainly before my time has had an anti-discrimination clause both in terms of its hiring and admissions policies. We expanded that 7 years ago to include some things that were certainly important that we hadn't had in the past, and we've incorporated that into our employee policies as well. We have a very strict code of conduct for our employees, and whenever there's been a case of an employee who's been, when a complaint is filed against an employee for identity-based discrimination or misconduct or hate speech, we have taken those very seriously. We have a wide range of disciplinary reactions for or consequences for our employees, including a progressive approach as well as termination, and we've used all of those during my time here. And last, but I think certainly not least, is our neighborhood initiative in Pottstown. This has been ongoing now for over 5 years. I think it's 6 years formally, but probably 7 years informally. Hobart's Run is a fully staffed neighborhood development initiative, economic and social as well. This is run by Twyla Fisher and Kathy Skitko, and this organization serves it's approximately 600 parcels in and around the Hills School as a neighborhood initiative, and but we also do quite a bit of work in other areas of Pottstown as well, and this has been not just an administrative initiative, but has very much involved our students and our faculty as well. And so there are a lot of issues, or a lot of components to this related to diversity, equity, and inclusion And we're really proud of the work that Twyla and Kathy have done, and all of our students and faculty and staff have engaged in over the last 6 or 7 years. So that's really what I wanted to share with you at first, in terms of just providing that framework again around things that the school has already been doing and continues to do. And now I want to really turn it over to our panel and share some of the commitments that we're making going forward around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of these things were already in the works, and some of these have been responsive to the concerns that have been raised in the last few weeks and months. So I'm going to turn that over, to our committee here in a second. I just want to tee up the first one and maybe ask Christy to also add her thoughts here. We are committed to hiring a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, a permanent director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, where that role is their primary role. Like all faculty members at Hill, they will certainly do other things as a way to connect with students and other colleagues, but it will be their primary focus. We will be launching that search pretty soon. We're working on the job description now. It'll be a national search with the full weight of the school behind it. We're very grateful to Christy for taking over this role for in an interim way this year. Christy, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think this is monumental for Hill. I've only been at Hill I'll be going into my 3rd year. But what I do know is I've heard time and time again that people want this particular area to be taken seriously, and there hasn't been this role like singularly focused before. So this will be a first time, I think, for Hill. Anybody that has had the role in the past has shared it with something else. I think for the last few weeks, people have been, looking at me and seeing director of diversity, et cetera, but I'm the chaplain, I'm the school chaplain, but also have been doing this as well. But we felt like it would be really important to make sure that we get somebody moving forward, because we realize it's more than just programming and students, student groups, that there's a lot of layers to this, and it requires a full-time commitment. So we'll be working with HR. I'll be helping to lead that effort. We want to bring in the best of the best, and somebody that will be prepared and experienced, but will come in and take it seriously. And they know that they'll have a lot of work on their hands.
Thanks, Christy. And we'll mention it later as we get into some of the other commitments, but the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion will play a role in some of those other efforts for sure, if not all of them. Next, I'd like to first ask Christy to speak again related to a faculty and staff committee that she's begun around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then I'll ask our 2 students on the panel, Saja and Andrew, to talk a little bit about the student version of that as well.
The other thing I want to add is, in the past, you've heard diversity and inclusion, and the word equity has been introduced into a lot of our conversation as of late. We just felt like equity is an important word. It addresses fairness, it addresses bias, and a lot of what we have heard has been some of the tensions and some of the frustrations around that. And so sometimes it's not automatically assumed when you're talking about diversity and inclusion that fairness and bias is involved in that. So we wanted to add that word into our efforts, not just for the position, but also for some of these other things. The other portion that Zach mentioned is the creation of an active diversity, equity, and inclusion faculty committee. This is a team of faculty and staff that's going to work to build an inclusive environment at Hill, challenge discrimination and bias, and provide guidance on equality and diversity related issues. One of the reasons why I felt this is important, and it's not just enough to have a director of diversity and just a student group, is because faculty need to this needs to be all hands on deck. Faculty need to not only get involved, but also be on the educating end or being educated end as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But There are significant areas of the school culture where we have designated a faculty lead for each of those areas of community life. And so just going to go through really quick what those areas are. Programming and events, that's really been sort of where Hill has been on the stronger end, having, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, having like MLK Day or week or whatever it might be. A lot of those are programming, but we also know that diversity and inclusion expands beyond that. But programming and events is important. The other one is we'll have 3 faculty leads over workplace inclusion and faculty conduct. We've heard a lot of testimony from students about whether it's microaggressions or comments made by faculty or whatever, and it's like, what are you going to do about it? We want to have a system for that. But then also, when I talk about workplace inclusion, I'm talking about making sure that our faculty and our staff are feeling included and involved, but also being trained. And we'll be working in the future during faculty meetings, et cetera, on that. And hate speech and identity-based student conduct. The reason why we say identity-based as well is because we know it goes beyond just calling someone the N-word or calling someone something. We know that there are other things that arise that are racial in undertone or bias in undertone that we need to address when it comes to students. The other area is new students and parent relations. We want to make sure that we're focusing on our new students, that they're not getting left out. Our student and affinity groups, like Zach said, there's WOCA, we have different groups, but we need somebody to manage that and oversee that. And just a few more: academic and education equity, which we'll talk about a little bit more, on how we can integrate it a little bit more into, a lot more into our curriculum. Equity and justice for LGBTQ students, our international student representation. I sat with a group of our international students, and they were like, we feel like we're getting left out in this conversation. This was like a year ago. And so we want to make sure that they are represented. Counseling center and athletics. So I'm sure there are other areas of importance, but those are the ones that we've narrowed it down to, that we need to make sure that we have people that are intentionally instilling diversity and inclusion efforts in those particular areas, as opposed to one large umbrella. Let's just deal with diversity at Hill. The way to do that would be to strategically make sure these areas have adequate representation and intent.
Thank you. Andrew and Saja, could you speak about the student committee?
Sure. I would say one thing that we're working really hard on right now is just creating more approachable platforms for students to share their voices, their stories with their peers, and keep this discussion going more than just 1 week during Inclusion Week. And that's done in weekend activities, afternoon activities, whether that's showing a movie or having student-led discussions, bringing in speakers. This is all stuff that we're working on. Another thing, and Mr. Baum talked about this a little bit, is having a more approachable platform for students to address certain offenses, whether that's hate speech. And in the past, they've had to go directly to a faculty member or one of the deans, but we're working on creating an email address that either them or reporter or bystander would be able to send in, and it would be confidential. And then we will go about addressing certain hate speeches offenses that way.
Yeah, and also I know that Andrew mentioned it briefly. We want to make sure that students are feeling comfortable having tough conversations, and that stems a lot from our leadership positions. So we're talking about having more formal training for especially prefects, who have a big part in making sure that our students feel uplifted and heard. We want to have more comprehensive training for them so that they know how to deal with certain situations that may arise in the dorm or just around campus.
Great. Thank you both. I'm going to speak a little bit about the academic curriculum review, and also ask Christy to add a little bit here too. So there are a variety of suggestions that have been directed to the school over the last few weeks in terms of how we can improve our curriculum to cover issues about social justice and injustice and civil rights, Black history, and a variety of related topics. As I mentioned before, this has been ongoing at the Hill for quite some time. All of our academic curriculum decisions are made by our academic council, which is a group of department chairs, our director of college counseling, our associate headmaster, and of course our academic dean. And this year we're adding a second academic dean for our new Quadrivium Center. So that committee reviews all new courses, all new initiatives, and then within each department, as departments try to do or try to add new programming, those are done with the full faculty in those departments. So this is not a process that happens sort of overnight. It's a very thoughtful process. And again, there are a lot of ways to do it. We could do this through our a freestanding course. We could do this through an expansion of our current courses. We could do it through some of our sort of, I would say, non-traditional academic programming. For example, we have a well-being program called Eudaimonia, which is required for our 3rd, 4th, and 6th formers. And we could incorporate it there. It's actually during the classroom day. We also, next year, we've just announced our calendar for next year. And one of the things that we're doing is adding a winterim period during flu season. We're trying to avoid having our full student body on campus. And we're considering incorporating a academic component around diversity, equity, inclusion during that time frame as well. So this is an ongoing process, and I have great confidence in our academic council that they're taking this very seriously. There's been a lot of communication even today, but certainly over the last few weeks and months around this. Christy, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of curriculum additions and expansion?
Just that, we're working on short-term and long-term goals, right? It's the end of June right now. So our short-term goals are going to have to start right now through the next school year. But we're also thinking about, long-term in terms of academics and incorporating things in the curriculum. It takes a while. If we're in a university setting, it would take a little while, but it won't take too long because we do understand the urgency behind it. I've always known any discussions around diversity in general has to go beyond programming. It must include curriculum in order to sort of display our collective commitment to dismantling racism alongside an appreciation of diversity. So these are things that we know. We have a prime opportunity to shape the minds of these kids and the future generation. And, we want to go beyond. And I've heard people say, oh, we should teach a civil rights course. Yes, of course. But that is not going to be enough by itself to teach about what happened in the 60s. We need to talk about the past. We need to talk about the present, and we need to talk about the future. We need a curriculum or classes that address sort of this in a holistic way.
Thank you. Mr. Baum, would you speak a little bit about our plans to strengthen the process and the response for hate speech and identity-based misconduct at Hill?
Yeah, thank you. So I spoke to some of the policies in place over the last that we established a couple of years ago more formally to have more opportunity for education, and now trying to add more mediation into responding to acts that are maybe more casual, for lack of a better way to put it, of inappropriate use of language, offensive language that happen in and around campus and unfortunately happen across a lot of places in society, and responding to those with as much, even to some of what Reverend Adams was saying, with more of sort of an intellectual or educational response, as well as having a disciplinary component to it. Whereas on the side of acts and language words that are students directing to anybody, whether it be fellow students or somebody who's not part of the community, even if it's on a posting on social media, those are considered offenses that would lead to a review of the student's position at the school. And that's been the case the last few years, but at the same time, we're trying to strengthen language and be more clear about that. So among the things that we'll do this summer is among the many forms that returning and incoming families get, whether it be health or affirmation of different policy and expectations at the school, there'll be a form on the new policies or the new language around our expectations around hate speech and identity-based misconduct for students and a parent or a parent to sign before they return to campus in the fall. I mentioned it before, Andrew mentioned it, it absolutely bears repeating. A top priority is that every student feels they have a voice. And at this point in time, it is clear that not every student feels that they have one. And just because we want them to all have voices, just because we ask them to feel comfortable speaking to us, doesn't mean that they all will. And that is why we're trying to have more confidential vehicles for reporting over email, over form submission electronically, so students have more ability to feel like they have a voice to share either what they're experiencing directly or maybe what they're witnessing other students experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. I'll just mention here quickly, in the past, we haven't really had a dedicated budget for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it has drawn from different budgets: student life, spiritual life, professional development, general professional development. We've made a pretty significant commitment going forward, and will continue to be reviewed by our Board of Trustees in terms of a budget allocation for programming, for speakers, for professional development, for curriculum development as well. We have done that already going into the next fiscal year, which begins on July 1st. I'll also speak a little bit to the increased focus and improved process on diversity in hiring and board recruitment. I'll ask Mike Harris to maybe jump in on the board recruitment piece. This has been a major focus for us. As I mentioned before, we've more than quintupled our number of faculty of color in the last 8 years. And that's not insignificant. However, we'll continue to focus on that. There are a number of organizations and search firms that that specialize in this area, and we'll continue to work with those organizations. We will also be putting the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion will have a formal role on our hiring committee, which has not been the case in the past. So that will continue to be a focus for us. And so we're committed to that. Mike, do you want to speak a little bit to board recruitment?
Let me unmute myself. As Zach said earlier, we're really actively looking for alumni and parents and other friends of color to be more involved. Usually the process is you serve on a committee.
Mike, we're having a little trouble hearing you. You're a little garbled. Could you maybe get closer to your microphone?
Sure. Is this any better?
Not really.
Okay.
You had a good moment there a few minutes ago.
That's really happened. Is that any better?
No. I'll let you work on that. I'll just share some thoughts here. We have a committee on trustees, which is their primary goal is to recruit new trustees, and we look across a variety of important priorities for the board in terms of the next round of trustees. Trustees serve typically a 3 to 5 year term. We have 28 trustees, and so they rotate off, usually 2 to 3 a year, although they can certainly renew their commitment to the board for another term. So this is another sort of short-term, long-term commitment where this will take some time, but it will remain a focus of the board as we add new board members. It's worth noting that of the 2 new board members that are coming on this year, one is a person of color. I'm going to turn it over to Rob Wally and Wallace Gundy to talk about the Alumni Association Action Plan.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. Really appreciate it. And I wanted to start off just by reminding everyone on the call what the Alumni Association's purpose is, which is to enable and promote the engagement and communication between alumni and the school and the advancement of the objectives of the alumni organization and its programs. So simply said, it's to help strengthen the ties between alumni and the school. And the ways that we do that include regional events for alumni. There are 14 regional chapters, both domestically and internationally, 8 affiliate groups that bring people together around common interests, whether it be hockey, football, wrestling, the arts, military affiliation, and the alumni society, just to mention a few. Career networking opportunities and reunions and other class activities such as virtual events, especially in light of COVID-19. But I want to talk a little bit about the leadership around this group. We have an executive committee of 10 alumni who lead and support the various subcommittees. And over the past several years, as we have added new members to the executive committee, I'm actually proud to say that we've grown the diversity of the executive committee in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, and age. Older alumni, younger alumni being a part of the executive committee. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in the details behind this to visit the alumni section of the Hill website where profiles for the executive committee are made available. I also wanted to underscore that the Alumni Association, it's a volunteer organization, and I encourage everyone who's on the call to get involved and to help make a difference. If I leave a single impression from this evening here with the entire alumni body, it would be that being involved and engaged with the Alumni Association is a way that you yourselves can personally help make a difference for both the school and the alumni today, as well as in the future. You can contact me, Shelley Baumgarten, Linda Hamilton-Kirk, or anyone on the executive committee. And I just wanted to wrap up before I transition it over to say that many of you may have read in various communications from the Hill that I'll be transitioning my role as president to Wallace Gundy from the class of 2004 at the end of this month. I've been a part of the executive committee for many years and have served as a president for 5 years. And I'm very proud to say that Wallace will become the first female president of the Alumni Association effective July 1st. So I'd like to transition it to Wallace now, who's going to speak about some of the plans and vision for the Alumni Association going forward, especially in terms of the topic here this evening.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. We as an executive committee are absolutely committed to incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion into our programming, our efforts, and our initiatives. And as Rob noted just a few moments ago, the executive committee of the Alumni Association is made up entirely of volunteers. What I would like to ask everyone on this call to consider is really evaluating your time and whether or not you have the time to join me in helping make an impact for our alumni in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The Alumni Association Executive Committee is very much an all hands on deck group. And quite honestly, we need hands in the air and we need help. This formal programming is absolutely in its infancy, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we have a lot to learn from one another. I've learned a lot on this call in the last 50 minutes, and certainly in general, we have a lot to learn from one another. And I would hope that each of you, no matter what year you've graduated, would really consider joining me in an effort to lead our alumni and better our organization going forward. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm hopeful that our contact information will be circulated at some point at the end of this call, but certainly it's also on the website, and I hope to hear from many of you soon.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Wallace. Lisa, our Director of Counseling, could you share some of our new and proposed counseling initiatives and maybe expand on some of the data that I shared earlier?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here tonight. So my focus is always on student mental health. And one of the great things that came out of the survey we did is that this survey really was built to measure virtual learning and how our students were feeling. It's based on Dr. Luthar's work out of Columbia. And what we learned is astounding. So as a school, Hill School was doing better than the comparative schools with virtual learning. But when you pull out the demographics in particular, you know, we really learned that students of color and how students identified themselves in that survey really weren't feeling supported. The communication wasn't the same as Caucasian students reported. There's a lot of pieces there that we need to focus on. So I've been eyeballing the Q&A and there's a few comments in there about how we're going to know if these initiatives work. And one of the things I think about from a mental health perspective is that our students should feel more connected. They should feel more a part of or have an experience that's similar to other students. They should have, you know, those things should be definitely closer together. So I think one of the things we really need to do is communicate with our faculty, number one, how students reported during that survey and what that means. Number two, you know, the programming is great, but if students aren't feeling the experience to be the same way, then none of these initiatives are going to be successful. So we really, in my opinion, need to focus on how students are feeling connected here at Hill. I think that's the big game changer if we're going to get any positive momentum with the programming that we're planning. So we have 4 licensed, clinically licensed counseling staff, and one of the things that we are going to be helping with is more concentrated prefect training, advisor training, faculty training, you know, really around some of these topics, more around, you know, we can talk about diversity issues, equity issues, and inclusion issues, but really it's about having conversations with students so that they feel they are a part of. So that takes some training, and our counseling staff is certainly going to be helping with that. All of the training that we're going to ask students to go through, I think the faculty need to go through as well. So we're going to be providing experiential training for the faculty so they can actually not just hear things, but experience things from a different perspective. So we're really focused on that. Eudaimonia has been moved under the counseling wheelhouse starting next year. And we're going to be using that class time to again, really focus on some of these issues through our Eudaimonia programming. We've just expanded the 4th form Eudaimonia programming to 30 classes. We're going to be tackling all kinds of different concerns and initiatives in there as well. We have rolled out some pretty good xenophobia training. I think as we talk about all of these things that we're building programming around, another one of my big concerns is just how our Asian students are going to feel being back on campus. So we have started in March doing some virtual training with advisory groups. We've put together, you know, kind of packeted, interesting programming for advisors to really have conversations with students, with their advisory group. That's not just a, hey, go watch this thing, and you know, it's more going to be, or it's definitely intended to be more meaningful. I'm sure I've missed a couple of things, but my big hope is to do the full high achieving school survey, which is the broader version of the resiliency survey that we did, maybe mid-year, to see if these initiatives are taking effect. So I think I would know that these initiatives are working if we did the full survey at some point, maybe towards the end of the year or further down the road, because our students of color will report differently. They'll feel more connected, and that's really what's important to me from a mental health perspective. I hope I covered that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lisa. And just again, a reminder that this is an area that we've greatly expanded just in the last year. in offering clinical counseling. Can you give the audience a sense of how many students overall have sought out clinical counseling services on campus in the last year?
Yeah, so we roughly we conducted 1,300 clinical sessions. That was family counseling, individual counseling, or group counseling. So those weren't just students coming in to, to talk one time. Those were actual clinical sessions. We have 4 licensed providers now, which is really actually unheard of for a school this size. I've actually never seen a school this size have so many licensed clinical staff, which is phenomenal. And then we just started this year, or this summer, I just started an intern program where we've hired a full-time intern who's completed all their coursework and they're getting clinical hours. So we'll have another person in-house to help with that work.
Thank you. And I would also mention that one of the concerns with our counseling program in the past, since we outsourced all of our clinical counseling, was that students who didn't have the means or the appropriate insurance could not receive that kind of counseling. So all of our clinical counseling there's no charge for it for our students. We don't bill to insurance as well. Christy, would you share with the audience a little bit about our community readings and the ongoing discussion around them?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit earlier about it being a little bit more integrated into the academic curriculum and how we had short and long-term goals. Again, one of the long-term goals being classes, required classes, or a required class. But one of the short-term things that we've been thinking of is how to address this with our students this year, or students coming in, and address it beyond, like we were saying, beyond MLK Day or Inclusion Week, but actually integrated into the entire school year. So we want to start as soon as this summer with some required reading. Again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So we're going to start with summer reading required. And then with the hopes of there being some intentional follow-up as the school year begins and as it goes on. So one of the books that we start off with, I actually have right here. It's, I don't know if you've heard of it, but Racial Profiling, Everyday Inequality. We wanted a book that addressed this head on and even beyond Black-white relations, but definitely, underscored the significance of that in this country, but also bias in general, just breaking down some of the terminology. I mean, we keep throwing around terms like privilege or white privilege or whatever, and there are some 13-year-olds that have no idea what you're talking about. So we really wanted to start with something that would be not too novice, but at the same time, not too much. And so this book is going to be a required reading for students for this summer. And our hope is that, I don't know what the year is going to look like as far as, because of the pandemic and what our orientation week or whatever is going to look like, but we will have one day right before classes where we will address this, where we will break out into conversations around the first few chapters of the book. We're not going to read the whole book this summer. It's not that long. But the reason why we're doing that is so that we can integrate it into advisory. When we have our advisory gatherings, we want to make sure that our advisors are, having conversations with students about this and talking through some of the issues. This book addresses contemporary issues. I mean, it's got Tamir Rice in here. It's got some of the most, even up until Mike Brown. So it's pretty recent, but it also deals with some of the historical issues as well and the foundations of some of these issues. So we're going to start with this book. We're just now having a conversation about how we're going to integrate it. So if you have questions on how it's going to be implemented, some of those things we might be able to answer now, but these are conversations that we're having this week. Also, we're going to have a book called The Other Wes Moore. That was already before all this required reading for an all school read. Because that is also, there's also going to be a speaker, Wes Moore, who I don't know if he's coming to campus or if he's going to be speaking virtually, but we're going to have him here in the fall as well. So those are the two things that or two books that we want to focus on initially. And then, hopefully as time goes on this summer, we'll be able to figure out more creative and innovative ways. But, this is required reading, not just for students, but it's also required reading for faculty. So we want to make sure that both are reading. And prior to students coming, when we have our faculty meetings before students come on campus, we're going to address these things and have conversation about this. So that's the hope, that's the desire. It doesn't solve everything, but we want to start by educating our students immediately. And so this is one of the ways that we want to do that.
Thanks, Christy. A number of you have contacted me in recent weeks asking the school to contribute its funds to a variety of different social justice causes. We're not in the position to do that for a number of reasons. First of all, it would not be permissible under our tax-exempt status. Most of our gifts are restricted for a particular purpose, and as is our endowment, and so we can't do that directly. So there's two things that we are committed to doing. First of all, an alumnus or a parent or any other friend of the school can contribute a restricted gift to the school to be used for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that happens all the time. We've had gifts, a wide variety of gifts directed and restricted for that purpose. So if you're interested in making a gift to any of the initiatives that we talked about, that's certainly feasible, and we'd welcome that very much. We are launching in I guess it's the second week of July, we're launching a fund called the 1,000 Hands Fund. This will have two prongs to it. Approximately 50% of the funds will go towards financial aid and tuition relief in light of COVID-19. We have a number of families, and this has nothing to do with this particular topic, but we have a number of families who are struggling as a result of COVID-19, and we want to make sure that none of our students are prevented from returning next year. And so 50% of the donation goes towards that, and the other 50%, the donor's discretion, can go towards Hobart's Run, which has set up a new social justice mini grant program for Pottstown, and we really want to act locally. So that is also an opportunity for alumni and friends of the school to support some of the initiatives that are really important to all of us. The goal there is to raise $200,000 minimum, and we hopefully will raise quite a bit more than that. We know that our alumni and families are quite generous to the school, especially around these kinds of issues and priorities. And then lastly, many of you have asked both tonight and leading up to this conversation, what kind of transparency and reporting and outcome measurement will the school do? And let me just say, we intend to be, and I think we have been fairly transparent. We intend to be fully transparent moving forward. We do have a diversity, equity, and inclusion webpage, which we're updating right now. We'll continue to update that. This week, we are releasing a Whatsoever Things alumni newsletter, which will summarize some of this conversation as well as the other forums that we've had and some of the action plans that we have. We're recording the session tonight, so we'll post that as well. We also have delayed Hill Ties, which was supposed to hit your mailboxes right around now. We've delayed it until August so that we can incorporate more information about our new initiatives and continuing initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll issue an annual report, which will probably coincide with the end of our fiscal year. As a few of us have mentioned over the evening, some of these are not immediate. They take time to work through. And so at the end of June next year, we'll issue an annual report and perhaps some interim reports before then. And we'll continue to report this to our board. We recognize that there's heightened awareness around these issues, and we want to make sure that we're transparent with our alumni and families and prospective families as well. So during our alumni events, to the extent we're having them this year in person, but certainly if they're virtual, we will report on these topics in an ongoing way. So that is our basically what we wanted to cover in terms of our current program, current data, as well as some of our early and initial commitments, which have been responsive to some of the concerns that have been raised. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike. Hopefully Mike's mic is working. Mike, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
A little bit.
I'm going to turn that off and just follow my cell phone. Can you hear me now?
We really can't, Mike. You're pretty garbled. I'm not sure why. You want to try muting and unmuting?
How's that?
We seem to have lost you, Mike. Well, until Mike comes back, we can start with some of the questions, and I'll read them, and maybe I'll moderate here a little bit and hand them to different members of our community, of our panel here. So the first question, and if you'd like to raise your hand, we have a ton of written questions here, so we're going to try to work through as many of them as we can, and some of them are repetitive, so we'll try to perhaps join some of them. So I'll start with a question from one of our alums. Hi, what are the metrics on how the initiatives mentioned, hate speech, misconduct, inclusion council, clubs and organizations, have affected the number of racially motivated incidents at the school? How is the school keeping track of the effectiveness of these initiatives? So Ari, if you could maybe start this one, and Christy, if you could perhaps add some to Ari's response.
Sure, thank you. I think that on a literal way to answer the question is we keep track of everything in the dean's office as far as demerits for dress code, to students separated from the school, and sort of everything in between and the reasons for that. And I don't quite know how far back our data goes, but it goes back pretty far from what I can tell. That said, there is in my opinion, a flaw in some of the data to some of what I was describing before, based on what I'm hearing from students recently, and I guess over the years I've worked in education, which is that we don't know what we don't know. So I think that to some extent, the best way to measure is anecdotally, which seems like a strange way to respond, but when we're a school of 500 students, 520 students, give or take, I think there's a real advantage there that we're even experiencing over the last couple of weeks, that students who are asked, or students who feel comfortable expressing things that have gone well or things that have not gone well, that almost gives us an extra layer of reliability in addition to the metrics, seeing what things, what there are upticks and what there are downticks in based on different initiatives. But I think the most important thing we can do is ask and listen to current and former students. So I think a lot of us in the last couple of weeks, and I would say over the time I've been doing this, we just engage in conversations with students about what's going well and what's not. And we need more and more vehicles for that reporting, as I've said a couple of times tonight.
So for me, I have a response and a non-response to this. I'll start with my non-response in the sense that I think it's a good question. I think it's something that I needed to be reminded of, that we do need to be able to find ways of measuring the success. What I've been doing the past few weeks is planning, putting these things out, these ideas, and having these conversations about how to move forward. But you're right, we do need to have measurable goals by the end of the year. I would say even by the end of every term, to sort of check in and see, okay, how are we doing? one of the ways, so yes, we will have to do that. And so we'll have to have a conversation about what that is going to look like. So that's my non-answer. But my other response is just based on student feedback. I mean, if you want to say, oh, how are the students feeling, or how are they feeling? Okay, go to Instagram. You know what I mean? Like we're able to see from conversations, from comments, we will be able to gauge that, you know, by the girls knocking on my door, you know, and sharing their experiences consistently. That is how I gauge how we're doing, but that's on a lower level. One of the things I do want to say that I met with the faculty DEI committee earlier this week, and all those different areas that I talked about, we talked about this fall having some sort of assessment already, you know, before they even start their work in those various areas, you know, talking to students, whether that be focus groups, whether that be surveys. We're trying to do a little bit of both, and just gauging the students and seeing where they're at. How are we doing when it comes to, you know, the reporting? How comfortable do you feel reporting a faculty member or another student? Lauren Hoyt was talking about our LGBTQ students, and you know, wanting to do some sort of an assessment or an audit, you know, an internal audit. I know that's a word that might be sort of frightening, but it's more of just an assessment as to how we're doing with this population. And once we see that, and once we get those results, each one of them is going to draw up, whether it's a report or something that says, okay, we've had these focus groups, or we've had these surveys done, and this is what we gathered, and this is where we're doing well, but also here's where we need improvement. So getting as much student feedback as possible. We need to go to the source, and the source is the students. And so that's my actual answer. But my non-answer is on a actual level where we have numbers and things like that. You know, we do need to think through quantitatively and qualitatively what that assessment is going to look like. So thanks.
Christy, can I just dovetail on that real quick? I've seen quite a few comments. I can't stress this enough. We don't need to know how Hill students as a whole are doing. We really need to know how the demographics of each student group is doing. So I think that if we do a bigger survey towards the end of the year, we really will know how the different demographics of students are doing, and then we can focus efforts on that. We can measure success by seeing and comparing it to how that looked during the resiliency survey, because international students might feel a lot differently than biracial students or the LGBTQ community. So I think it's really important with whatever data we're collecting for each representation to have a voice of all of the demographics. So I'm excited to hopefully do that later this year.
Lisa, just to follow up on that, there's a question here related to that, which is, hi Lisa, could you discuss how many of our counselors are Black, Indigenous, people of color, or LGBTQIA+ identifying? And if not, what kind of resources are you providing for students that may have difficulty receiving counseling from a counselor that has a different identification as they do?
So we have one licensed clinician of color. We certainly have a list of referrals or outside providers that I've been keeping over the year when students reflect, hey, I'd feel more comfortable in this way or that way. I think we have all of our bases covered. If it's not at Hill School, then it's certainly outside of Hill School. The only disadvantage is that students have to pay for services outside of Hill School. But certainly, just even within our own team, we're working with the HOSOGI, we're going to be working a lot with the student group that's just formed as well as another student committee that's just been formed to address mental health issues of students on campus. So, so I think we have it covered, whether it's in-house or out of house, for sure.
Great, thank you. We have our a hand raised. So Leah, I think this may be Leah Proctor, but I'm not sure. Leah, I'm gonna allow you to speak here. You're unmuted. If I'll hit it again, maybe. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay. Leah, can you hear me?
Hi, yeah, this is Leah.
Hi,
Hello.
Leah.
Sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. We're quarantining with a young family member of mine, and it's bedtime. So,
great to hear your voice, Leah.
Hello? Oh, yeah. So I've had my hand raised for a while. I know that there are a lot of questions, and I don't want to take up too much time. I'll go stepping away from the Q&A. But as a student who came from the Pottstown School District, who grew up in Pottstown, who is in Pottstown in this moment, I'm particularly invested in how Hill students are engaging with the community around them. The Pottstown School District registers 66% minority students. They have a 66% graduation rate. About 20 people, according to census data, are living impoverished or in poverty. So these aren't necessarily abstract, invisible issues that Hill students, don't have right around the corner. These are issues that are happening in the community. And I think particularly that a lot of people in the Pottstown community feel like there's a lot more that Hill could be doing. So as an more about that, but what the commitment is going to be to engage students in a meaningful way with what's happening in the very neighborhood that they live in.
Yeah, I'd like to ask both Saja and Andrew to respond to that, and then maybe Mike, who chairs our Hobart's Run board committee, if his microphone's working again. But Saja, I know, has done community service at Hill, and Andrew's been very involved in Pottstown efforts. So I don't know which of you would like to start first.
Yeah, I mean, I can just talk from the perspective of us, because I'm on the Hobart's Run student committee, and I know that we've been trying to get more incorporated, especially with the Ricketts Center, and that's something that Saja and I have talked about. They were under new management, so we were actually hoping on bringing back like a Boys and Girls Club and bringing down students from the Hill on weekends in an afternoon activity to help tutor these students. Unfortunately, obviously, with the pandemic, that changed a little bit. But we're also trying to do other fundraisings. There's a backpack initiative that was sent home to Hill students, and the hope again was that they would come back in the spring term with stuff for the backpacks. Again, we're still planning on bringing those back in the fall. They would have like school supplies for students. But no, we agree that there needs to be more done from the students. And so we're hoping that with the Ricketts Center reopening, that we have an opportunity to get back involved.
Yeah, so I totally agree, and I've been doing community service since my third phone year. I have a real passion for it, and I really love it. And one of the things that I've always felt has been sort of lacking is students' devotion to going out into the Pottstown community and spend money at the shops in downtown Pottstown and going to different restaurants in Pottstown. And I definitely think that's just something we could do a better job at. And I think it has more to do with just getting the word out to students and encouraging them. So we will definitely be doing more of that next year.
Mike, you want to give your microphone a shot?
Sure. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better. Perfect.
Great. Sorry about that. Just to comment on Hobart's Run, the school has really been very active and trying to pull the leadership in Pottstown together to have more of an impact and to target how we fundraise and how we use our dollars. Zach has a leadership monthly brunch with a number of the leaders around town and has forged a much better relationship. We were part of raising money, and when I say we, it's really the school and various alumnus of the Hill School that really helped the school district get the laptops so they were able to have their virtual school setting this spring. So we've been doing a lot doesn't get said in the press, and that's all right. And we'll keep playing a bigger role in Pottstown, and I'm very hopeful that coming out of this pandemic, our efforts will truly pay off.
And Mike, I would just add to, in addition to Hobart's Run, one organization within the school that was established at least 10 to 15 years ago is the Student Philanthropy Council, which is student-run, a foundation within the school that's endowed. I think they give out between $12,000 and $15,000 per year to local organizations, and those decisions are made by the students. They visit the organizations, they review their financial information as well as their grant requests. They follow up with the organizations. So that's been a major impact on Pottstown. We get something like 30 to 40 applications per year. We can't fund them all, but that's been an area of funding for the school, a particular point of pride. And we have forged, Leah, we have forged a really good relationship with the Pottstown School District. I have regular conversations with Stephen Rodriguez, their superintendent. We've tried to build collaborative programming, ongoing relationships using Hobart's Run, but also in other areas. And I think our students have been very active in a variety of initiatives around Pottstown. And we've emphasized getting students into downtown every weekend for shopping, community service, other sort of active events as well. So thanks for the great question, Leah. Mike, do you want to take over the questions, or should I keep going?
Zach, why don't you keep going?
Okay. The next question here is, why was the decision to have a full-time director of diversity, equity, inclusion not made before now? The Shipley School created such a role in 2018. Did the school not see a need for the role? If not, how was that assessed, and what scorecard was used to reach that conclusion? This is important because if this is a reactive hire and forced fit, how successful can the person taking this role be? Christy, I'm just going to mention a little bit of data here, and then I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to address this. So we are part of a 40 school group called ABOPS. It's 40 boarding schools around the country. Some of the larger boarding schools, you'd probably know all of their names. And of those 40, 20 had full-time directors of equity and directors of diversity, equity, and inclusion this past year. 11, including Hill, had a part-time role in that area, and the other 9 did not have either a part-time or full-time role. We certainly are in the mix there in terms of current standards. And then, Christy, do you want to talk a little bit about how we reached this decision and how successful we think someone can be taking on this role?
Yeah. So we've been talking about this for a while. I've, with our previous associate headmaster, him and I had many conversations about this year. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was already in the works, but this isn't the first time we're talking about it. And I know it's not enough just to talk, but it's not the first time that we're talking about it. The other thing that I'm going to address is I wouldn't say that it's force fit. We're going to make sure that it's not force fit. Sometimes, your feet has to be put to the fire in order for things to happen. We're seeing that in our nation right now. There would not be certain reforms being done. There wouldn't be certain responses if people weren't in the streets, marching and screaming about it. Now, if those things hadn't happened, that's why protest is so necessary. If those things hadn't happened, right, then these things would not be getting done and wouldn't be addressed. And that's just on a national level. So we're not any different here. And so I would be a fool to say that the urgency of the time that we're in right now didn't help propel and didn't help push this. But had that not happened, then this would not be the case right now necessarily, or maybe it would, I don't know. But the most that I can do is try to ensure that we have the most thorough search and that we bring a person in, not to set them up for failure. I know what it's like to be, put in a position in other positions that I've been in prior to here, being set up, feeling like you're being set up for failure. I would not want that for this person. I would hope that is the case for everyone, but I will say personally, I wouldn't want that for them. So what we want to do is make sure that we we set them up for success, but also that they know that they have, a huge responsibility coming in. The first anything. I've been the first in pretty much all my positions that I've been in, either the first woman, the first Black woman, the first woman of color, whatever that might be. So I know what it's like to have that pressure coming into a role that's so visible, where people are looking at you for answers to everything. So we want to set them up for success, but we also want to be as honest as possible, and that's why we also want to make sure that we have someone who is experienced and educated and has done the work, because then coming in, this won't be, a shock. It won't be too much. They would have done the work, I guess, prior to here. So we want to be as intentional about this process and about finding the right person, and making sure that, that when they come into this environment, that they, are welcome, that they are prepared, and that we do the best we can.
Thanks, Christy. So there are a number of questions asking to break down some of our diversity numbers, and I'm happy to do that. I can share that around students of color as well as faculty of color. So I'll start with faculty of color. I mentioned before, 18% of our faculty are faculty of color, and that's up from 3% in 2011-12. That's 19 total faculty members, 5 Black, 6 multiracial, 3 Latinx Hispanic, 1 Indian subcontinent, and 4 Asian. On the students, it's basically, I can give you this year or next year, it's almost exactly the same. I'll give you this year. A total of 18.3% would be considered Black, Indigenous, people of color. 38 students were Black this year, which is 7.2%. 28 students are Indian subcontinent, 5.3%. 16 students are multiracial, 3%. 15 students are Latinx, Hispanic, or Mexican, which is 3%. In terms of the data, the student data, I believe, is self-identified during the application process. We don't annually survey that after the application process. And the faculty of color is self-identified. And so that's that data. We have a hand up. We'll take Tanisha, if you're there. I'm going to allow you to talk here, and you're unmuted.
Hi, sorry. So Tanisha, class of 09. I also have Sam Steller. She's on the phone, and she was interested in speaking as well, but she wasn't unsure. She was unsure on how to get unmuted.
Okay.
So just wanted to say that real quick. Quick plug, I guess, because I too gave a speech for Martin Luther King Day. I mean, I think that that's something that people of color seem to have in common. I wonder if you happen to have gotten a fancy laminated speech or something of that nature. So I guess what I'm really wanting to say is that socioeconomic backgrounds are something that, like, is not, to me, like, in my experience, wasn't really spoken about, and was just very big. Elitism was allowed to be pervasive, and issues and consequences, just ways that, like, people could, like, flaunt their wealth or flaunt, differences. And we had many issues on campus that oftentimes were just, like, laughed under the rug, or it was like a prank, or you were sensitive, but, like, were really big issues. For example, like, my freshman year, like, I was in a dorm, and I was the only student of color with another student of color, and our room got TP'd. And, like, that was horrible. I remember that. I was pissed. And, everyone at the time was like, oh, like, that just happens, laugh it off, and, like, no one else got TP'd. No one else, like, no one else had that experience, And, like, I look back on, like, some memories, and I really think, like, it's really messed up that I was in certain situations that, like, honestly, like, I wasn't, like, I was part of, because people made assumptions about me because of who I was and not necessarily knowing me. And honestly, I think that Hill, in my time at least, you know, like teachers didn't do a great job necessarily of addressing these issues. I was really fortunate to be in a class my junior year with Doc Malone and Mr. Ide, and we spoke about a lot of issues in our American Studies class. And like, frankly, like it was embarrassing. Like I was the only person of color and I had to be the advocate and like talk about racism, talk about slavery, and have, you know, my white classmates talk about how they, you know, they walk around with the Confederate flag and how they don't understand why they have to share equal rights with me. You know, I had to walk around in my $20 blazer and people had $100 blazers and clothing. And, you know, like you just had to make do, and we never talked about it. We never talk about these things. It's great that you're doing all of this stuff, but like, are you addressing the fact that there's students that may not be able to afford to get to and from campus? They can't afford that, you know, that bus fare. I misremembered part of my experience at Hill. I thought that my tuition covered transportation. It did not. I walked to the bus station, and at 9 p.m. at night, I was waiting for the bus home by myself, a person of color in the dark in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. And my mom had to pick me up in New York City at 11. And my advisor had to fight for you guys to pay a little bit of extra money so that I can at least be able to feel safe. And my mom had peace of mind. Like that just wasn't a thought, you know? And that should have been. It shouldn't have taken, you know, my safety or my potential safety for changes to happen. It shouldn't take offensive situations or incidences for things to be different. You know, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing right now is like, come on, it's 2020. I get that we're changing names of things and we're starting to have these conversations. But honestly, it's a little too late because it's, you know, we're here, you know, like we know it's messed up. You guys know it's been messed up. Like the Trumps, like, have you addressed the Trumps having been, you know, alumni of our institution? Do we, like, has that been something that's been talked about? Like, I don't know. It's just like everything that you guys have mentioned is really great, but like there's a lot that's not being spoken on. And I would love to know that information because, you know, like, I don't know. It's like, I don't love saying I'm part of the Hill. Like, that's not my history. Like, I've done a lot beyond that. And it's, you know, I'm not proud to say that I'm part of this place right now, frankly. So, yeah.
Tanisha, thank you for sharing that. And I need a little time to process that as well. I'm disheartened by certainly some of the comments that you made and the experiences that you had. I wasn't here when you were a student. And I hope that those things, kinds of things don't happen. And I hope that we can restore your pride in the school with some of our initiatives. And I know those things do continue to happen at the school. We try to address them as best we can and try to prepare our students moving forward. There were a couple of things in there were a number of questions that you raised. I can address a couple of them and maybe others can join me. First, as far as it pertains to additional expenses for students on financial aid, we do have an additional fund for, you know, spending money and other transportation costs and the like, and that's generally distributed according to a student's financial aid percentage for students who are over 50% financial aid. And so there are funds for everything from books to transportation to, you know, some of the other things you mentioned as well. As it relates to your comment about Don and Eric Trump, this has been something that has come to me periodically throughout my tenure as headmaster. And I know it's a very challenging issue and divisive issue for our students and alumni and faculty and others. I've tried to emphasize in my communications on this and tonight that our the way we can influence the world the most is by focusing on our current students and trying to prepare them for all of the challenges that the world presents to them after they leave Hill. And trying to make them good citizens, trying to make them thoughtful, empathetic, have good core values, be critical thinkers, be advocates for what they believe in, and orchestrate positive change in their communities. And we do our best, and we can do better. But I don't think we can be an organization that polices our alumni. We can launch them. We can wish them Godspeed and encourage them to keep to the values of the school. But I think the notion of denouncing an alumnus of the school or disavowing an alumnus of the school is not something we've ever done. And I don't think that that's something that our Alumni Association or Board of Trustees would consider. I mean, I know that's painful. And I know that's painful to have to say that, someone that you don't believe in is a fellow alumnus of the school. But all I can say is return to our core mission, which is to produce empathetic, thoughtful students and encourage them to keep acting that way when they leave the school. But I think if we start deciding which alumni we want to associate with and which ones we don't want to associate with, that's very dangerous territory. I don't know if anyone else, Wallace, if you or Rob wants to speak to that, or Mike, or any of Tanisha's comments.
I want to speak to just one of the things that she said, or a few. I can't. This is I can't speak to Hill per se and your experiences that you had then. I'm not here to defend that. None of us are here to defend that. I think we're really here to listen and to hear you out and to actively listen, not just to listen passively, but to actively listen and trying to ensure that we provide environments that are, I don't say more positive, I can't think of another word, moving forward for our current students. Racially charged environments, particularly when you're the racial minority in those environments, they can be psychologically damaging. It adds up, right? And it can be even more psychologically damaging when you're gaslit when they're brought up. So, when you're talking about, that happening in your dorm room, of course they're like, oh no, that didn't happen because you're this, those things add up. They're microaggressions, of course, right? And that was a little bit more macro, whether it's from students or whether it's from faculty. And it's what I've been dealing with all my life, right? That's why I said I can't speak on behalf of the Hill. I can speak on behalf of myself as a Black woman. It is the nature of being a Black woman in America, right? And it's not to accept that. You don't have to lie down and accept that, or, just give in to that. But we do need to have spaces where we're able to speak to that, right? To be able to sort of be safe when it comes to our expression based off of the society, the contentious society that we live in, that we're going to continue to have to live in, because it doesn't begin and end at Hill. And I'm sure it has continued long after Hill. I'm sure there have been plenty of institutions or places that you worked at where you can say that you're not proud to have been there. I can say it, right? And so as a result, we need to provide spaces for our students, particularly some of you said, oh, what do you mean by students of color? I will say Black when I mean Black, right? And so for me in particularly, are young Black girls on campus. That is always going to be, you know, one of my main target audiences, right? And one of the things that, you know, I just try to do that's not even on the books, right, is once a month, Sasha, you're there. Once a month, we have Black girls gather at my apartment where they come over, you know, everybody's invited. They come over, they have pie or eat or whatever, and they just talk, you know, and share just like you did just now. You share very courageously to a group of people that don't look like you. And this is a space for me that I try to do my part, where girls can just come and share, and they've cried, they've laughed, they danced, they watched TV. I don't, you know, half the time I don't even know what they're doing because I'm not always, you know, just in their face, like present. I try to just be there to be a catalyst, but there's some things that they're not going to say to me. But what I can say, just my commitment moving forward, and has been my commitment, is to make sure I'm providing that safe space for girls, not just in that one event, but just, and not just in my apartment or in my office, but me personally being that safe space for them. And my hope is that eventually that will trickle down to other faculty and staff, where students will feel that way.
Tanisha, it's Mike Harris. I just want to thank you for your honest comments, and I'm glad you shared them. I'm glad we hear that as a community. We all have different experiences. One of the reasons why I got back involved, Hans Mentz and Zach Lehman came and talked to me about getting involved, and I wanted to make it different and better for the new generation that's coming to Hill today and tomorrow. And again, everyone should make their own decision about if what we're doing, is it good, is it bad? But there's a lot of thought and a lot of effort going into it. I'm really pleased personally, because when I got back involved, my one thing my wife said was, knock yourself out, get involved, but your daughters will never go to the Hill. And lo and behold, you know, my daughter just finished her 4th form year, and she very much likes it. I think the culture is very positive, and she's a lifelong dancer. So 10 years of ballet has turned into the Hill dance crew, and I never knew there'd be a Hill step team, but there is. And I think there's a different culture on campus now, and I hope you'll come back and give it a shot. It's been rewarding for me to be back at Hill and back in Pottstown.
Thanks, Mike. There's another question here, which is, sorry, someone wanted to say something?
Sorry, Zach. This is Rob Wally. I just wanted to quickly add to the comments here, and I know that the clock continues to run. It's getting late for everybody, so I'll keep my remarks, you know, very brief. But you know, just to kind of echo Mike's comment, you know, first of all, thank you so much for your comments, and Tanisha, and I think you mentioned that Sam was on the line as well. Really appreciate it, because one of the things that I'm here to do this evening is to listen and to learn, and I've learned a lot from what you've had to say. But I did want to come back to the comment or the thought just in terms of alumni and alumni engagement. And you know, I strongly believe that getting involved and engaged is the way to change things and to make a difference. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about the Hill School and alumni involvement, engagement, or any other, you know, cause or effort or initiative. And so, you know, I'd say, Tanisha, my comments aren't necessarily directed at you, because I don't personally know the involvement that you may or may not have with the school, but I would encourage all alumni to self-nominate, self-select, raise your hand, reach out, contact me, contact Wallace, contact anybody you feel comfortable contacting and figure out how you can get involved and engaged, and most importantly, get your voice heard, because I think that having more voices come to the table to share ideas and perspectives is one of the most powerful ways that we can all collectively address these issues that we are all grappling with. Thanks, Zach.
I just want to add to that. I think that you make a really good point about getting involved, and you know, I shared some of our statistics on students of color and Black students, faculty of color, Black faculty, board members. You definitely know how to reach us, as has been clear in the last few weeks. If you have classmates or family members or friends or professional colleagues that you'd like to see at the Hill, that you think would help in all of these areas, please share them with us. Share them with our board of trustees. Share them with our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Share them directly with me, and continue to do that. You know, if you know young people that are considering a prep school or boarding school, and you think they do well at Hill and would impact our culture in a positive way, send them our way. Send them to the admissions office. We can't do this alone, and we need everyone's help: alumni, students, faculty, trustees, parents, and other members of our community. We did say this was going to be 90 minutes, but there's so many questions. I think we can maybe take a few more, Mike, if that's okay.
That would be great, and if you'd save 5 minutes for me at the end.
Yeah, sure. A question online: does Hill plan on supporting a formal Black Alumni Association? Rob and Wallace, or Wallace, you want to take this one?
Thank you. So the Alumni Association, as it stands right now, is really the only body that exists that truly every single alum who graduates from the school is a part of. And what I will say is we have had interest in the past in creating an affinity group with the alumni within the Alumni Association, specifically for Black alumni, for various reasons in terms of volunteer efforts, et cetera. This hasn't gotten off the ground, but I would, whoever asked that question, I would welcome a conversation about helping that happen going forward.
Great. A question, and this I think is going to be probably for Ari and Lisa. Will student orientation, I assume this means coming next year and beyond, include teaching and coaching on what is considered appropriate speech, productive dialogue, etc.? I know if my parents only had to sign off on a sheet saying they acknowledge hate speech is against the code of conduct, I wouldn't have had any deeper understanding on how to listen to my Black BIPOC peers, how to refrain from gaslighting, how to understand and appreciate historical injustices and their place in the microcultures like Hill today.
It's a good question. We actually have a meeting to plan that tomorrow, but currently the first day of classes is slated to be August 24th. Students will be back a couple days before that, assuming they're able to get back to campus, of course. But on August 23rd, the day before classes, that's what our meeting's for tomorrow, is to plan programming on that day on exactly the topics that were raised in that question. Lisa, I believe we were on that meeting tomorrow, Christy as well, but Lisa maybe have more to add to it.
Yeah, we're just in the beginning stages of developing what that programming will look like. Definitely some education around things that we should know, but many students and faculty don't, like what is a microaggression? How am I operating with my peers, and how is all of those things we're going to be developing specific programming for on the 23rd. And not just on the 23rd, throughout the year. I want to be clear about that. We met with our well-being committee this week. We're looking at the layout of the calendar year. We don't want this to be an August thing, or a September thing. We want this to be really part of our fabric, which means that we are going to have these conversations over and over and over again in many different ways and through many different venues. So we're looking at how we can do that across the entire calendar year, which is great.
Okay, we have a number of hands up. I'm going to allow Johnny Corson to talk. Johnny, I'm unmuting you now. Can you hear me, Johnny?
Hi, yes. How's everyone doing? Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. And thank you to everyone on the panel for putting this together. I just wanted first to take a moment to remind us all of why we are on this call. And that is because Black people, a lot of which are of the age of some of the students at Hill, are being gunned down in the streets. And I want to connect that to everything that we experience, whether that's, you know, how we walk through our daily lives, go to school, where we work. And so it's a little disappointing to me that we hadn't addressed the specific experiences of Black students on campus until almost 2 hours into this call. And so I think we need to reflect on why that is, why we are maybe apprehensive or nervous not to call attention to that specific issue. And so that's one thing I wanted to raise. And then also, I think, you know, I work at Tufts University. We are a place of higher education in the Boston area. And when issues like this arise, whether it's targeting Black students or Latinx students, undocumented folks, underserved communities, there is no hesitation to call attention to those issues and how they affect the students that we are charged with educating and protecting. And so I think we also need to reflect on why it is that Hill is not as quick to make similar statements. I know there are certain limitations that maybe we can't talk about on this call, but I also wanted to just raise that as another point of reflection as well. Again, thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you for having us, and I look forward to working with everyone on how we can address these issues in the future.
Johnny, thank you so much for both of those comments. I also noticed that you asked a question online, and I want to address it. I'm trying to find it here, but it was a question about basically how do we plan to respond to some of the allegations or situations that were reported on social media in the last few weeks by our students, and both on our webpage and on the Black at Hill, not webpage, on our Instagram account and on Black at Hill Instagram account. I'm going to let Ari maybe speak generally about how we address allegations or accusations or situations like this in general. I mean, he's talked about it a little bit, but maybe going forward, many of the circumstances that have been raised on social media are things we're aware of. So Ari, you want to talk about that?
So if it's a student or if it's an allegation against a student, then the dean's office and the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee would review those cases, and some of that we're sort of beefing up going forward, as I alluded to earlier. And our response would be, if it's a act or words that are directed towards somebody, we would investigate. We investigate any sort of report that comes to our attention at the dean's office. But when it involves hate speech or any sort of action based on how somebody identifies, The Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee would be involved both at the faculty and student level, including to review a student's position at the school in the discipline committee process. It would be including representation from the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee to have both those insights within the committee, but also to have that ability within the room to evaluate the student's position. If it's not an allegation against a current or somebody who's a student at this school, I would refer that to Zach if it's a faculty or a member of the who's an employee at the school, or law enforcement if it's somebody locally and we feel like the law has been compromised. So if it's a student, then the Dean's Office Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee would respond. Versus if it's not a student, I would refer that to Zach, the Dean of Faculty, Director of HR.
Okay, thank you, Ari. And thank you again, Johnny. Mike, you asked for 5 minutes.
Sure. Thanks, Zach. And I just want to thank everyone for the dialogue that we had here tonight. I think it's a great starting place. I hope you all see that the school is putting a lot of thought and energy into this area. We need more feedback and more support from you to do more. But we're trying very hard, and I'm really hopeful that this will be a continual dialogue. So I did, and I said this at the beginning, that I think Hill's doing, compared to when I was a student in the 80s, light years better. And but that's just my opinion. I'm not sure that our society in America is doing all that much better. And in some ways, it's gotten worse. In some ways, the divide, I think, between, for lack of better terminology, the haves and have-nots hasn't really changed, or it's gotten wider. One of the downsides of the election of Barack Obama, I think a lot of people said, gee, this is now a post-racial society. We can all just move on. But we have to have these rich dialogues. We have to have some uncomfortable conversations. We have to stop the violence against Black people and other people who may be a little different. And we have to dig into the economics. What's it costing our society to be this way? I'm in an economic business. I'd like to give you a couple examples of what I've been part of. I haven't done it by myself, but I was I think our second Black partner. Now we have 30%. Over 30% our partners are people of color or women, and the firm has diversified from being almost all white and all male to over 60% people of color and women. One of the things that we're doing that's in the news, we had an op-ed in the New York Daily yesterday, just talking about what it means to defund the police. We actually created a center for justice finance where we teamed up with Ron Surpass, who's a former chief of police of New Orleans, and really look into the economic part of fines and fees and what's it cost to actually arrest someone and have them sit in jail for a week if it's because they didn't pay a $30 parking ticket that became a $100 ticket. That was a big part of the story of Ferguson, if you've read the Justice Department's report. And we're getting some traction. We're getting traction by Democratic places and Republican places that realize that the current system is unsustainable. So I hope that you all are involved in Hill going forward. I hope that you also take away from this conversation the need to be involved in your firms and in your communities, because you know, Hill is a special place. I think we can be more special, but we have to look at the larger society and societal issues to make this a better place. So I really am greatly appreciative of the time you all and the comments and the questions that were made tonight. If you didn't get your questions answered, please go to the website, send an email to Zach, send an email to me, send an email to Rob or Wallace, and we'll get answers back to you. So with that, I wish you all a good night, and thank you so much for your time.
Mike, I would just add, we will be sending a follow-up email to alumni through our Whatsoever Things newsletter. I think Friday or Monday. I'm not exactly sure which date. We'll try to answer. There were just so many questions we couldn't get to. We tried to get to as many of them as we could, especially the duplicate questions. And we'll try to answer as many of those questions as we can in that follow-up email as well. And I want to add to Mike's thanks to all of you for sharing your time with us tonight, for sharing your stories and your experiences with us. As I've said in my communications, we are not just talking about this. We're not making empty promises. We are committed to action here at Hill going forward. And I hope that you'll hold us accountable to that. And I'm sure you will. And I'm sure there's a number of people that will step forward and hold themselves accountable as well. So we welcome your involvement, and I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope we can continue this kind of conversation. I hope we can do it in person at some point when campus reopens, and we look forward to welcoming everyone back to campus. Thank you all, and thank you to our panelists, and please stay in touch.